Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our next session, a spotlight on use case identification. I'm delighted to have you all here today. My name is Ashley Thompson. I'm part of the Applied AI and Machine Learning team here at J.P. Morgan. And I'm really excited about this session. I think for me as a data scientist, this is something that we spend a lot of time about, thinking about what are the questions that we're trying to answer, for whom, what is the impact of trying to answer them. So this is a critical piece of the data journey. And I'm so delighted to have our SMEs here to tell us a little bit more about this. Before I introduce our subject matter experts today, just a quick note, you will see on your Zoom screen a bit of a Q&A sort of thought speech bubble. Please, throughout the session, if you have any questions, write them directly into that chat and we'll have some time at the end to go through them. So please don't be shy. The more questions, the better, and looking forward to an engaging discussion. So with that, I will hand it over to our fantastic subject matter experts. I'd like to introduce Imelda Abo from Bloomberg and Pinar Emmerdag from J.P. Morgan. With that, I'll hand it over to Pinar and Imelda.
Very, very nice to be here. And so what I'd like to do is to introduce the session first before everything else, and with a few disclaimers. This is a probably quite diverse audience, and our use cases, our examples, the case studies, the way that we speak might be a little bit different than what you are used to in your day-to-day lives. But what we try to do is to give you, examples that hopefully could be related to what you do as well. Because ultimately there are really many commonalities between different use cases and the way that we can actually approach this problem. And so just to summarize, we are, I'm very excited to be co-hosting this with Imelda, and the session goals include things like how do we even think about use cases, like what is a use case, how do we formulate them, what are the right questions to ask, what are the considerations around outcomes. I mean, in fact, outcomes are important, and how do we actually think about impact before we even start the use cases? How do we separate objectives from tools? Because very often it's a common experience. We get confused between sometimes what we are really trying to achieve and the joy of the tool itself. So what is the difference between objectives and tools? How would the importance of subject matter experts, the practitioners working with the data scientists, the commitment that's required to make the use cases a success. And also things like a little bit more technical, maybe slightly more technical considerations around data literacy, the importance of explaining the benefits of the use cases, and the outcomes are like how are they really all connected to the success of the initiatives. Those are the type of things that are important to remember. And without further ado, I will actually move. I'd like to actually, if we can actually change the slides and start with to the next page, then I will actually pass it to Imelda to take it over and give you a real expert start here.
Thanks a lot, Pinar, and hi, everyone. So I'm going to start by defining what use case identification is and why it is important. So use case identification is the first step in any data journey, during which organization would outline the aim of the specific data use, how it aligns with their business goals, and which questions it will help them answer. And scoping the use case before starting to work with data is really important because it will ensure that your project will create new knowledge and that this knowledge will add value to the organization. And a lot of people actually start their data journey the wrong way around. So they would first select a data set, then they would use the tools and technique they have experience with to analyze it and generate some insights. And then finally, as a final step, they would try to understand how these insights can be used to solve a specific business problem for the organization. And in many cases, they'll notice that they've been trying to solve the wrong problem or that their work didn't really add value. So to avoid this, it's really important to always start by scoping your use case. And yeah, you would create some structure that you can follow along the way while you're working on the project. So yeah, now we have a couple questions for you. So it would be great if you can participate by answering the questions on the poll that should appear on your screen. So yeah, if we can get the first question, please. So yeah, it's about how often you start your data journey by scoping the use case. Yeah, I'll give it a couple of seconds until we can see the results. Okay, that's really interesting results. At least we can see that most of you are familiar with use case identification, and almost the majority always starts with use case identification, which is great. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, we would have convinced you all to always start with use case identification. And yeah, we have also a second question, if we can also get this question, please. Thank you. So this one is about whether you use a specific framework to define your use case. So I'll give it a couple of seconds so that everyone can answer. Okay, that's really interesting results. So I can see that the majority don't follow a specific framework when defining use cases. So in general, it's good practice to use a framework because it ensures consistency across the different projects in your organization, and it provides you with some guidance and structure. So I hope today we're going to walk you through a framework that will hopefully be useful for you. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So there are different ways to scope a data use case. And yeah, today, as I was saying, we're going to walk you through a specific framework that we use to give you an idea on how you can approach use case identification on your end. So yeah, our framework is mainly centered around asking the right questions before choosing the right tools and techniques. So it's about understanding what are you trying to achieve and why would what you're working on would add value before you dive into the technical details on how you would achieve it. So yeah, the first set of questions is around understanding the project's context. So which business goals it supports, what work it is going to further. And this step is actually really important because your ultimate goal is always to achieve your organization's goals. And by answering these questions, you'll define the larger goals for your project. The second set of questions is about understanding why your project will add value, which problems it will help solve, and which questions it will help answer. And yeah, but usually by clearly explaining your problem and the problem you're trying to solve, you will ensure that the project that you're working on is meaningful for your organization. And then the third set of questions is about understanding the vision of your project. So what does success look like and how will you measure it? And to do that, you would usually define actionable metrics that you can link to your organization's goal and that your project will help improve. And these metrics are usually called KPIs, so they're key performance indicators. And then finally, the last set of questions is about understanding your project's technical requirements and its feasibility. So it includes understanding what your data requirements are, which tools and techniques you will be using, what skills are needed, and so on. So yeah, we won't go into a lot of details in this section because there are other sessions that will discuss these topics in more details. So we have sessions about data sourcing, data storage, data visualization, and so on. So yeah, we really encourage you to join these sessions if you're interested to learn more about this part. So yeah, now I'm going to walk you through an example use case that was scoped using this specific framework to just give you an idea on how it can be applied. Can we get the next slide, please? Great. So I'm going to start with the first step, which is the project's context. So in this case, we have a nonprofit organization that would like to improve its fundraising efficiency. And to do this, it first needs to get a near real-time overview of its donors and its fundraising intelligence. But this is quite challenging for this organization because its data is currently stored across different Excel spreadsheets that are maintained by different teams. So not everyone has access to the same intel at the same time, and they may act on old or incomplete data, which isn't great. So now that we have the project context, we need to understand why this project will add value. So the project they're working on will add value because it will help them get real-time business intelligence. So by answering questions like how can the data be harmonized, and by harmonized, like I mean centralized in one place, and how its timeliness can be improved. And yeah, once they identify the appropriate solutions to do that, they would implement it. And yeah, now moving on to step 3, where we need to define the project's vision and what success looks like. So the vision of the project is that anyone in the organization will be able to access all the data in a single centralized place in a timely manner. And yeah, the idea is that the access to the data will be very easy, or easy enough so that people are encouraged to do data-driven decision making. And yeah, in general, to measure the progress of this project, some appropriate KPIs could include maybe reducing the number of databases down to 1. So moving maybe from 100 or 50 Excel spreadsheets to 1 centralized database. And another one would be reducing the data latency from days to hours or minutes, depending on their needs. And yeah, both metrics are actionable because the team can actually work on improving them. And then the final step is about understanding the technical requirements of the project and whether it's feasible. And this includes understanding how can they collect all the data spreadsheets, how can they review the data quality, which database will they be using, what is the data schema, the data model, and so on. And yeah, once you've answered all of these questions, you would have a very well-defined use case. So you can start working on the project. So I hope that this example gives you a good idea on how the framework can be used. And now I'll hand over to Pinar so she can walk you through 2 different corporate use cases.
Hi, thank you. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much. Okay, so these are relatively abstracted use cases, but I want to, before I start and give another example, really talk about the importance of this framework. And as Imelda was talking about the framework, it's the first thing that really came to my mind is it's quite important because the journey could be somewhat challenging sometimes when you're working on a use case, and having a framework is going to help you stay on course, right, and stay focused and get to the result, as opposed to get maybe getting discouraged or so forth. So that's really important to almost use it as a kind of a guideline. And it may not be exactly the same way in your own context. You may have different questions and so forth, but I think building some kind of a structured way of working is actually really useful. And there are actually 2 use cases that are a little bit coming inspired by corporate examples. I will go through the first one now, and this one is a relatively relevant and as close as it can be to a real use case that we actually worked on. And this is basically COVID. Let's say the times that we are going through. The markets are quite different, and all of a sudden a client service team goes through, sees huge spikes in their daily work and their volumes that they need to deal with, and the queries they need to address. And they're absolutely not prepared for that, because you don't really prepare for those kind of circumstances, and these kind of things, as we now know, happen. So that was a real challenge. And what the question is to figure out if there are any relatively easier, or at least easier ways of helping them with the use of data science, and helping them sort through their emails, the queries, and then automatically route them to the right person and classify them and so forth. So why is this important? It's important because, well, I mean, certainly it's a capacity issue, but also it's for reducing the errors, it's for managing the risk, it's definitely for serving the customers better without any disruption and so forth. And these examples could be similar to some of the things that you are working on, even though the words might be different, your stakeholders might be different. But you know, I would imagine that there are some, the commonalities are some unexpected events and need to actually address that potentially with use of data science. And in fact, maybe do it even like use it for the future after that event actually goes away, which actually makes it even more interesting. And if you go to then the I covered what and why, and if you actually talk about like where and like what we really want to do with this, well, the results really should be quantifiable and measurable. It's quite important because if you don't, obviously, we do want to make sure that we can actually also demonstrate the results and understand if actually we are doing the right thing. But it's also for communication as well. And it is, remember, these kind of initiatives are require investment from all stakeholders, including the subject matter experts that are actually, in this case, the client service agents that are every day, you know, already in their normal day, working to servicing the clients, but yet they need to actually work with the data science team to help them classify, they help them, you know, understand the coverage model. So it's really, that partnership is actually really, really important partnership, and it's actually potentially some additional work for a period of time for these SMEs. And it goes, commitment also goes also is obviously important from the stakeholders perspective, the data science perspective as well. So that's why it's important to move towards one goal that's quantifiable and measurable, so that you know, there's a purpose to it really, and people actually do know what they are going to get out of it. And then in terms of the how, Imelda is right, we won't talk too much about it, but these are actually relatively, at least at a high level, important topics to consider. I mean, do you have access to data? Is it a showstopper from the start? Then we may want to think about something else. Do we, in every industry, there is usually some kind of a privacy clearance, data use consideration that needs to be addressed. And so those are the type of things that one should just kind of at least have an idea of how to address from the beginning. And in this specific example, SMEs are really, really quite important, because without their classification, as I mentioned before, you wouldn't be able to really take the project to success. So this actually worked out very well, ultimately. And the team not only actually achieved a good result, and they actually also, I mean, this really helped them reduce their email volumes and the queries and automatically route and so forth. But also the one of the important takeaways was really working relationship between the two groups as well. And you know, the confidence and the way of working and the ability to go to the next actually next use case after that really grew because of this experience. So it is a story, hopefully, that can help you help you with your as you think about your own use cases. So if we go to the next one, before that one, I think we have a question actually. If you don't mind, do we have the question? Kudin? All right. Then we do. All right, perfect. All right. So okay, this is a before we go. So I wanted to ask you, we wanted to ask you if you ever needed to pivot during your use case journey, if you have, you know, went through these kind of journeys, and you know, something that, you know, changed your mind or something didn't happen, you just decided that you wanted to pivot, and for whatever reason. Not sure how long we should wait for that. Should we give it a minute or so? A little bit, or no, not maybe that much, but. Perhaps the results. All right. Okay, good. Nice. Okay, so this is perfect. And okay, so we are not going to be talking about failing fast kind of conversation in this one, but there is actually some interesting interesting thing is because it's not really about failing, I have to say. In this next use case, wanted to really talk about, it's not, I won't go through it one by one, but well, about an experience that where actually we needed to pivot, and it was for a very, very good reason. So in this one, it's a quite complex process. It's which requires lots of different stakeholders, technology platforms, different data sources. It's an important process. I mean, the ambition was high. So it was the, what is very, very, frankly, relevant to us. And it's an important requirement. Why we were going to do that? I mean, basically reducing the bottlenecks, reducing the dependencies, reducing the understanding the root cause for delays, and also how each step of the process really is, how long each step of the process takes. All of these things are important for us ultimately to really simplify this process. So we did actually talk about the KPIs, which in this case, the point that I want to make about the KPIs is really focus on the ultimate goal. So what maybe specific example here is what we sometimes tend to do is to achieve some nice little wins, which is great. These are important. But we may not yet have achieved our ultimate objective. In this case, really reduction of that ultimate time it takes to complete the process in this case, approximately from 20 days to 20 minutes. So you could have like some local successes, but that doesn't mean that it's a success overall. And I'm sure that there are applicable again applications in other industries as well about those kind of things, because I have gone through these things in my career a number of times. And so the question then is, at some point, what we decided as we went through all the steps, that this project, this actually is one of these projects we probably won't be able to achieve that ultimate objective. We will have those local wins, but the process itself is too complicated and too many dependencies, and everything is dependent, and they are interdependent as well. So we decided to, in this case, stop and learn from our what we have done in between some interesting learnings. Didn't achieve our ultimate objective through data science tools. In this case, this doesn't mean that it wasn't something that we won't be leveraging, but we decided to stop the project and focus on other things. So this is the kind of thing that I would really encourage. That again, where encourage you to be very comfortable with, and as long as you're confident with your framework, your approach, your the way that you have been going through those steps, I think it's just perfectly fine to be sometimes find other solutions, other ways of working on these things. Okay, so with that, I think if we go to the next page, please. So just to summarize, pretty sure there are many other learnings in these examples, but just a few of them. Always solve a real problem, not necessarily create a problem just because some of these things could be exciting, so we have a tendency just to play around sometimes, which is not a bad thing, but it's a different objective. So solving a real problem is important. Formulating expected outcomes, KPIs are important. I am hoping that in some of these examples really shows you, because then you know if you really are onto something or not. Investing time and effort in the SME data scientist partnership is really important. And it's actually not an easy one either in both sides, but it is the showing successes and going through this actually usually really helps. And there is availability of data and systems are important, even though I wouldn't recommend that necessarily this should be only like this should be a showstopper from start itself, but still it needs to be evaluated for sure. And then understanding the data use, privacy, governance considerations. Again, those are things that one should just not underestimate the importance of as well. So with that, I will pass it to Imelda.
Thank you, Pina. Can we please move to the next slide? So I would like to continue sharing some of the lessons we've learned as well when working on like a data project. So yeah, it's very important to understand like that data science is an iterative project. So yeah, when you're working on a data science project, you need to be agile. So any use case that will evolve over time. So as you gain more knowledge, as you gather more information, your project will mature and your use case will need to be reviewed and adjusted regularly. And as you're reviewing your use case, you shouldn't be afraid to pivot and change your strategy. Your ultimate goal should always be to achieve your organization's goal. And the strategy that you use doesn't matter, as long as you understand that the given way that you're currently working on is not working. You should not be afraid to pivot. And in general, like it's good to see that every setback is a learning opportunity, because whenever you start a new project, you will know you would have learned from the previous projects. And yeah, the diagram on the side is just an example. It just shows you how it is an iterative project. So you always start by defining the use case. You'll start working on the project. You'll measure the progress along the way. You learn from it, and then you might need to refine your use case and rework on your project. And can we please move to the next slide? And yeah, in terms of next steps, just to make the best use of this presentation, we encourage you like to outline your business goals after this presentation for the year, and just define all your data use cases using the provided framework, or maybe an adjusted framework that you think is better for your organization. And then just review all these use cases and then prioritize them based on the value they'll add to your organization. And yeah, it's important to have a view of the different use cases that are happening at the same time, because you'll notice that there are a lot of similarities between the use cases, especially if you're working on data use cases. So you can approach different challenges together, and it would be more efficient. And yeah, I hope you really enjoyed our presentation. We have, can we please move to the next step? Next slide. So we have like a couple of resources here that we hope will be useful for you. And yeah, that was it on our end. We're now going to open the floor for questions. And yeah, we hope that you enjoy the presentation.
Great. Well, thank you so much both for that great presentation. We have a few questions already, but as we continue our discussion and particular things come to mind, feel free to keep using that Q&A button, and we'll try to get through as many as we can over the remainder of our time here today. So our first question that I'd like to cover is, how do you think about moving from something that's quite a large business objective into something that's a little bit more discrete or tangible or answerable? I think, if we're looking at some of those use cases, like, moving from something from 20 days to 20 minutes, it probably didn't come in like that in the first order. So what's sort of some of your tips or learnings around that, and how do you sort of narrow that funnel into the real crux of the question you're trying to answer?
Shall I try to take a step at this, or yeah? Sure. Hi. So okay, it's a very, very good one, and what I will say is, because I did talk about the importance of like ultimate objective, right? I mean, you could be solving for like a pretty, like maybe the second use case is a good example. Like it's a very, very complex system, really important, large problem. We could not have really gone about, like we couldn't have really evaluated, like solved it by without really breaking it into pieces. But the important thing is how you connect the different pieces with each other. Just because, again, you actually, like in this very specific unique case, you have a large problem, you then look at all the processes, like the end-to-end process, all the data sources, all the like SMEs and stakeholders, all the touch points, and then you start breaking into different components of that one big problem. And then you start figuring out, okay, so if you improve this side, what does it mean for the other ones? But in this one, it's a bit of a challenging example. That's why maybe not the best example, because everything is interconnected. But still, you need to be solving it in breaking into smaller pieces, regardless. And in this example, also one more thing that we were trying to use actually is some kind of a technique where we could actually schedule different components as well. So there's a bit of a like a more of a unique situation. So I guess the point is looking at your process end to end and break it into pieces. Looking at your touch points, looking at your data sources, and identifying like how you can actually like the different characteristics of those processes, because they could be very similar as well, and building your use cases. I see Imelda kind of nodding. So would you like to add something from more real data scientist perspective, Imelda?
And I agree on what you're saying. So we always, like, whenever we have a project that is a really big project, we try to break it down into a smaller sub projects. And every sub project we'll try to get more information so that we can work on the other sub projects. So usually the first sub project is more of a discovery phase, trying to understand the different pieces that we don't know, that we're trying to get information about. And then as we start progressing, we set newer milestone. And we always have like the ultimate goal in mind as we're moving through the different steps. But it's usually, I find it very hard to plan the whole project, and because you don't have enough information when you start with it to plan the whole project. It's more about once you start working on the different subtasks, you'll start learning more and you'd be able to define what you need to do next. So it's better to like just approach project management in general in terms of from an agile perspective, where you want to learn the quickest so that you can adjust your milestones that you're trying to achieve.
Thanks, Imelda. That's really interesting. And I think what I'm really hearing both of you saying is a couple of things. Number one, I think there's a huge amount of effort that goes in at the sort of beginning of any project. And it's really important that we're not skipping through that process. It's really about identifying, all of the people that need to be there, really getting super detailed and crisp into what we're trying to solve and why. And like, we can't speed through that. It's just, important in making sure that we're ultimately setting ourselves up for future success. I think the second thing, and Imelda, you mentioned this, is really about that kind of agility and breaking something that's quite large, always keeping that in the back of your mind. But how do you sort of make it a little bit more tractable, solve one thing, learn, then solve the next thing, and being able to sort of build on that quite incrementally, I think is really interesting as well. I guess, maybe Imelda, building on that, one question is, do you have sort of some examples of things that you've learned when you've been breaking that down that has caused you to sort of pivot or change direction? What are some of those learnings and how have they impacted, your approach?
Yeah, sure. So maybe like an example I could think of is that sometimes when we start a project, we think that we really understand the problem, and we're trying to solve the specific problem based on the information or the knowledge that has been developed in the team and by subject matter expert. And then we start working on solving this problem, but we notice that this specific what we're working on is actually not solving the ultimate problem. And yeah, we usually like pivot and try to find other data sources or other ways to gather information to rescope the problem and understand it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes maybe we would be focused on knowledge that we have gained or that or the people that around us know about, and we would frame the project around this. But then sometimes like we notice that we actually don't have all the information that we need, and that we've been framing the problem from like a subset of information, that we should go ahead and try to find other data sources, other ways to understand the project and approach it from a different perspective, so that we can actually like make an impact in the end.
Okay, so realizing you might not have all of the data that you need, you may have to go out and refine that or redefine things.
Exactly.
Great. I guess from both of you, you mentioned a lot this importance between the sort of data scientist SME partnership. Given you're both experts in this area, can you give us some tips on how that is best used or looks like and is successful? How to really strengthen that partnership? What are kind of the key tenets to making that useful and fruitful for both parties?
Yeah, I think on my end in general, like one of like the most important thing that when you start working on a project, you create the team as a cross-functional team where you would have the data scientists working alongside the subject matter experts from the beginning, and they're both trying to solve the same problem, and they would see how beneficial it is for both of them to work together to reach the goal. Because for example, on my end, if I was just working on the problem without really understanding the business problem and the knowledge that is coming from the subject matter expert, you wouldn't be able to make an impact, because data alone without the context doesn't really make an impact. You really need to combine the data with the context, with the business value, with the knowledge, and all together will help you make an impact. So it's really important to keep collaborating across the different functionalities within a team so that you can actually make an impact.
Yeah, I mean, along the same lines, right? I do think it's actually really the most important thing. And it goes to the heart of really like different skill sets complementing each other to come up with something really, really interesting, like as a result, right? So SMEs, I mean, there is huge knowledge in literally seeing the data every day, seeing what happens, like at which time, at what time, and during the day, in what circumstances, or this or that. There are all kinds of things that actually involve, that SMEs know about, like specifically about that process. It's so incredibly valuable, and combining that with data science resources and could be just really a really great experience, because then that's how you actually start thinking, like understand those intricacies and more interesting things that actually can come out of it. It's not just okay, we just basically have somebody who is working on a data and once in a while coming and pinging for questions. It should be really more successful examples is that it's actually a very, very connected experience. And frankly, it also is about the stakeholders around as well. I mean, sometimes as we mentioned, it's not it requires investing time. Sometimes it's above and beyond what people do in their day-to-day jobs. So that also means that it needs to be some kind of like constant iteration, constant reminder of why this can be interesting, and the joy of innovating something and coming up with something new. I think should be always reminded, remembered, and encouraged, frankly. And so that's why it's really, really important to focus on that and try to have fun, bring the fun into it as well. Because that partnership is like data scientists cannot really do what they are doing without, and the SMEs, I mean, obviously, so it's really is essential.
Got it. I love some of these. So what I think you've both mentioned. I think number one is really making sure that everyone is working together on this. It's not something that just one role is working on kind of alone. It's about getting everyone, in the proverbial same room to sort of work on this problem, which I think is super important, especially, sometimes we as technologists will think quite, within our domain area, but the power is really by having this interdisciplinary team looking after a problem set. So I think that's super important and clear. I think something else that was quite interesting that you both mentioned is really about the constant reaffirmation or refocusing on the goal that you're trying to solve. I think that's important not only to make sure that you're still all on the same page, but also, that you're still excited about this and that you're still, focused in the right direction. You have the right engagement from everyone. I think sometimes we get stuck in a bit of a slog around some of these problems that are challenging. And so I love the tip around, continuing to refocus on what you're trying to solve and the impact that it has for your organization. Um, I have a few questions here on sort of data and how you're using them to create KPIs. I know this is something that I have struggled with a lot. So interested in both of your perspectives on this. I'll add in sort of my view on this, which is sometimes we focus on things that are easy to measure because we have the data that's available to us. How do we think about really creating good KPIs that are meaningful? Really interested to get, and for my own edification as well, what should we be focusing on? What are some good, back of the envelope kind of rules for things I should stay away from versus things I should be focusing on? And that's to both of you.
Shall I just give you a high-level answer? But it is a little bit high level, and on purpose, I explained to you why. Like I think we should think about KPIs, or like what we do is almost as in different hierarchies, like because ultimately it really needs to be about like solving a business problem, whatever business is, it's non-profit or profit, it really doesn't matter. It's some kind of a business problem, and that require like what. So to your point, Ashley, is actually quite interesting because I see that all the time, and like within that, let's say that you have a business problem, and there are a number of drivers for that business problem. You can be, interested in efficiencies. You could be interested in, like coming up with the best experience for your clients. You could be like there are so many different dimensions of like that's relevant for that very top business problem. And to be honest, some of them are easier to measure and say down, we have done it. So, but if you think about it, it's actually really, let's say that one of the 4 or 5 important things in your top business problem. It's really not like all the other three things could be, for example, not even, we may not be even measuring that. So it is actually something that we all come across a lot as well. And so you have so ultimately, you have a business problem, and you have a number of like a top objective, and you have a number of layers, I think, of your objectives. Like your top layer could be, making this up, like maximizing something, and then how do you get there? And then under that, you start thinking like breaking it into smaller and smaller, like pieces of other KPIs that build up to this this framework. And I really do encourage to think about also the KPIs that are not necessarily as easy to measure. I mean, for example, and usually, sorry, for example, one example is in my very relevant conversation, it's about client experience, like what's very hard thing to measure in some ways, right? But that answer may not be coming from your that specific data science problem. So I guess what the point that I'm trying to make is almost like these topics are themselves are very hard topics. Like how do you actually measure client experience, and you build a whole framework for that. And that then becomes one of your drivers for your top line business problem. And under that, you have your KPIs. Next time you do a data science project, that should be connected to that that specific dimension. Let's call it that way. So you may not like I guess if some of the KPIs or knowledge about how to calculate them should be frankly coming up. Like it's not easy to create them all for that specific project potentially. Over time, you actually build an institutional knowledge of how to actually solve those KPIs as well in a more like in our case. And so you don't really need to invent how to actually measure client experience in this one. You actually have some knowledge around this, and then you start connecting the dots around those. So I guess the point there is you start recycling the techniques and the approaches, and here remembering that please let's not go to the easiest one to measure. It may not be. I mean, you can be solving for something, but it may not be enough. Simply. Sorry, long-winded. Imelda, I'm hoping that you have a very, very specific, good way of answering this one.
I guess like on our end, like in general, when I work on a project and I try to gather data to calculate KPIs, the most like important thing is that we want a KPI that is actionable. So that is like the thing we focus on all the time. Because if you can't work on improving it through any type of project, then there is like no point of measuring it because you're not impacting it. So whenever you're doing a project, you're trying to work to improve something. So you want to see the causation of your action. So when you have a KPI that is actionable, you're certain that, okay, now you'll try a specific action and you'll see how this action will impact this specific KPI. So I guess that's like the main thing we focus on when we talk about KPIs. And also like in terms of, as you were mentioning, Pina, it's like it's important to not go to the first KPI you can think of, but also like try to think of other ways. What are you really trying to measure rather than the first thing that comes to mind? Because it's always easy to have these vanity metrics, they call them. That, yeah.
I didn't know that. That's such a nice thing that I learned. Yeah.
I think that's so interesting. Thank you both. And I think, Imelda, your point around, making these actionable really resonates with me. From my own experience, we've done tons of stuff where the outcome is that's interesting, but so what? And I think keeping in mind always like what can we action off the back of that is super important. I also really like Pinar's point around, you know, focusing on sort of what I would call like the outcome as opposed to just sort of the input metric itself. So thinking about sort of what is that larger thing that you want to change rather than just these little incremental pieces. I also was struck by the fact that like two other things. One is I think this is hard. I mean, both of you are experts in this area, and it's like this isn't something that is always easy. And I think you've both, expressed today a little bit about, how you've gone back and changed a little bit or sort of amended or learned from experience along the way. So I would encourage everyone to not be overwhelmed. This is something that we're all learning and trying and getting better at. And it's a constant process. I know that we've talked about a few things today. I just wanted to sort of recap on some of them and then just turn it over to Pinar and Imelda for sort of one last quick take. But I think just sort of a quick summary of some of the things that really stood out from my perspective. I think the first is really spending the time up front to invest in what problems you're trying to solve, why, and how you're going to go about doing that. The second is really around agility and being able to respond and change along the way. We're never going to get it perfect from day one. So being flexible and open to that along the way is part of the process. I think the third is really around the partnership and collaboration aspect. This is something that one person can't do by themselves, one team can't do by themselves. It's about everyone working together to sort of solve these things. And really then the fourth is really about making sure that the problems and things that you're measuring are not only related to the larger thing that you're trying to solve, but also that they're actionable. And then I think 5 is, again, it's about practice, not perfection. Getting something started is, the hardest part. And don't let the, perfect project with all the data and everything there stop you from making progress along the way. Pinar, Imelda, what can you leave us with? One last thing that you would love this audience to sort of think about or go away with?
Just
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, just a very simple one for me. You really summarize very well, actually. Just really go at it. And your point, I mean, as we were speaking, I was thinking it's not like none of us are giving answers. Oh, we've done this exactly like that. It works like this. It's not like that. It is really I mean, it's constant learning, constant experimentation, and pushing and going at it and iterating. And I wouldn't really get discouraged at all with anything. Like just stay on course. It's really what I was thinking. And these are hard. Don't worry about it. It's just fine. I mean, it's a good thing to do. Work on.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, both of you summarized everything really, really well. But yeah, I guess just I would like to re-emphasize on the importance of always starting your data journey with use case identification and just asking the right question and always focusing on your ultimate goal. And the strategy and the way you get there doesn't really matter as long as you get there some way.
Can I say one more thing? Because
of
I don't want to leave it. These are hard comments. I mean, look, I mean, it's what I guess the point is. It is hard in a way that there are no cookie cutter answers, I guess, is the way to explain that, right? I mean, that's the best way of doing it. So it is not to discourage that these are hard and not just don't worry about it. You just basically, the whole idea is in your day-to-day jobs and work and the data and I mean, there's just so many interesting, I'm sure, use cases around that. As you go work through these frameworks and iterate and so forth, you will just go through that journey and get really interesting results. And people do that every day. And so it's very, very doable. And it's actually, the journey is very, very interesting. And the outcomes are really powerful.
Amazing. Well, Imelda, Pinar, thank you so much for your time today. I think this was a great session. For all of our attendees, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to hear a little bit more about this important topic. We're looking forward to sort of being in touch and continuing the discussion around the data journey. So thank you again. Speak soon, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.